My name is Julia. I'm the marketing manager here at Theralytics, and I'm so excited y'all are here today and we have the opportunity to do this. We're an ABA software company, and we actually have our founder and CEO, Rana, here today. And I'll let him intro and kick us off and get started.
Right. Everyone, thanks for joining today. My name is Rana. I'm the founder and CEO of Theralytics. As Julia said, we're a leading ABA practice management and data collection software company. A little bit about myself. So, I've been in the field of ABA for quite some time. Actually, started out as a behavior technician in college and just loved it and quickly fell in love with the field. And that then led me to become a BCBA. And over the years since then, so I've had held a variety of clinical and non-clinical roles at large organizations. So it gave me a pretty good, well-rounded perspective on the industry. And then after gaining enough experience, I actually decided to branch out and create two ABA companies myself, which I eventually sold. And then that experience actually inspired me to combine my passion for ABA and my interest in technology. And that's kind of how Theralytics was born. But today, I'm really excited to share with you and outline in terms of how to start your own ABA organization, what steps to take, what to prepare for, and what to expect along the way. If you don't mind, can I just ask where everybody is kind of at in terms of their ABA business journey? I know some people are just thinking about starting it. Maybe you've had a business name, an MPI. Just curious as to where people are at. You can just type it in the chat if you don't mind. Mm, Cool. All right. Florida. Awesome. That's great. Cool. So one of the first questions I always get and I always see is where do I start as a new practice owner? And the first thing that I always like to ask people is to make sure you clarify why you want to do this. I'm not trying to scare anybody with what I'm about to say, but I like to just provide a real, down to earth, practical perspective in terms of starting an organization because it's absolutely not easy and there's a lot of challenges involved. And through my own experiences, I've obviously made mistakes and I've learned from them. And one of the things I'm very passionate about is disseminating information so people hopefully do not make the same mistakes that I did, right? So one of the first things I tell people is make sure you clarify why you want to do this, right? Why do you want to start your own ABA practice? Is it for independence? Is it for better service delivery, more flexibility? Your why really has to be strong enough to carry you through the tough parts, right? So ask yourself before you step into this, is that do you want to do this? First, business ownership in general is very tough, right? Not many startups survive, right? The statistics on new businesses surviving is actually quite low. And ABA in general is even more challenging, or any type of healthcare human services field, right? And these are just some of the things that you're going to be up against, just to name them, right? So first is just the reduction in reimbursement rates, right, across many state Medicaid plans. Right? I think it was just last month I was hearing that Nebraska just cut their Medicaid rates, right? And then Illinois did it a while back. There's challenges now with Florida Medicaid. I know someone mentioned they're in Florida. And then you have the combination of just higher cost of living and inflation, the economic uncertainties at the federal government level, all of which impacts margins and your ability to do business. So you will be up against some economic challenges moving forward, right? It doesn't look like the rates are getting or increasing. Actually, seems like quite the opposite, which is a tough battle to fight. The other part is increased competition, right? So you're starting your ABA business, you're going through this journey. I mean, so are these very large private equity backed companies. And the truth of the matter is that they often have a lot more money for increased recruitment and retention. And so they're able to outspend, the practice owner, a solo practice owner in the same area. So there is this increased competition there. Obviously, there's differentiators, right, of having a more smaller practice, increased quality, you'll be able to communicate with families more directly than some of these, private equity backed companies. But that competition is there, right? There's also just the general challenge in finding and retaining quality BTs. If your service model relies on just retaining quality behavior technicians, there's a challenge involved with that, right? Because majority of the work is going to be part time. So you'll have a difficult time just finding quality BTs. And in some areas and some Medicaid plans, they actually require RBTs. And so to find high quality RBTs is also, again, quite challenging, given the part-time nature of the work. And also you're going to be competing against these large private equity-backed companies. Right? 1 minute here. The other piece that you'll be up against is, truthfully, in some high cost, low reimbursement states, and I can think of California, and I'm sorry to single out California in this example. I know someone just said they're in California, they started their LLC, but truthfully, some RBTs can earn more in retail than in ABA. And I think California has that law now where fast food has to pay, I think, minimum $20 an hour. And with California's rates and just general high cost of living, it gets very challenging to find those high quality BTs, right? Again, money isn't the only reason people choose the industry, but obviously bills need to be paid. So those are things that you have to take into consideration as you're starting your journey, right? And again, one of the things that I've seen, and this has been a problem for quite some time. It's not a new problem. It's just general high BT turnover. You can have a great company, great culture, high clinical standards, but to some degree, you may have high BT turnover, and it could be a variety of things, right? The pay, the part-time nature of the job, the educational level of the BT, them finding other opportunities. So it is something that you just have to take into account, right? And if you're a solo BCBA, right? If you're just a BCBA that was working at another company, right? And you're pivoting over to being a business owner, to be honest, sometimes you actually make more money working as a BCBA than as a business owner, at least in the beginning. And the reason for that is like a lot of these companies, they will offer high BCBA salaries where you can just focus on the clinical work without the stress of administration, HR, and compliance, often which you earn more than you would starting out and running your own company, right? In general, like just as to reiterate, running a business can be very tough. It can be a nightmare. And the other thing I like to emphasize is that being a great clinician doesn't automatically mean you can run a business, right? Those are two different skill sets. And as you kind of move forward in this journey, right, you want to keep that in mind is that you may be a very talented clinician, but you'll have to learn a new skill set to run a thriving and successful practice, right? So one of the things that you can do before you get started or as you get started is assess your experience. And you want to assess your experience so that you can really fill in the gaps in terms of what you don't know, right? Do you understand the ABA business model from front to back, right? Have you been in a position or have you read up on it in terms of what this looks like in terms of hiring, right? The administrative piece, the HR, the billing, the compliance, the legal aspects, all of that. Do you understand each of those items? I'm not saying that you need to, right? You don't, because there's resources out there to help you with that, right? But you have to assess your knowledge and understand what experience do you have and what experience do you need to outsource, right? So really understanding the administrative, HR, billing, legal, and compliance pieces, the pieces that you may not necessarily get exposure to day to day as a BCBA working for a company, right? The other piece is, have you held a role beyond a BCBA supervisor, right? One of the advantages that I had that helped me quite a bit is that I worked as a clinical director, expanding multiple regions for a company, which provided me a lot of valuable experience in higher level management. And so having that experience can be a very huge advantage, right? So again, not saying that you shouldn't jump in, but definitely know your gaps so you know how to fill them. Okay. So once you've assessed your experience, and again, don't mean to scare anyone, but again, I want to bring just the practical, viewpoint of the industry so far, and kind of what you may be up against. But if you've assessed your experience and you feel like you're comfortable in terms of moving forward, the next thing you want to do is make sure you do the math. right? And when you do the math, it doesn't have to be very complicated, right? Later on in the webinar, I'll give you some kind of sample financial projections in terms of what it looks like in terms of running your business, at least getting started. Um, but do the math and understand what revenue could look like for your business. And I'll give you a bit more examples later. But if you're a BCBA, starting your own practice, one of the key advantages that you have versus maybe a private equity company is that you can continue to do the BCBA work yourself at your own company. Sometimes I know people like to immediately hire a BCBA so they can focus more on building the business. I know it's a lot more work, but in terms of quality of services and having financial reserves so that you can have money saved up for payroll. I always recommend people, continue to work as a BCB at their own company, right? You get to build strong relationships with your family and staff, and you get to modify and refine those policies from ground up, right? So if you're a BCBA, definitely continue to do the BCBA work at your own company. I know it's challenging, but it's one differentiator that you'll have in your organizations versus maybe a PE-backed organization, right? And if you're currently a BCBA at another company, right, one of the things that you want to think about, and you're thinking, okay, I'm going to go and start my own organization. What do I do and how do I do it? Is that you want to start planning your transition, right? Um, One way to do this, right, from a financial perspective, is something that I did was I held various types of part-time consulting and contract roles, obviously where it's allowed and legal, and being transparent with the company that you're working for. Hey, I'm starting my own organization, but I'm willing to help you out while I get clients. You'd be surprised how many organizations are open and willing, especially the more small and local organizations are willing to assist somebody in providing them work because they'll be able to get a BCBA that can help them out with their cases. And you can help build your own caseload, right? While you're building your practice. The other piece of this is just to understand your local financial landscape, right? And what I mean by that is to understand your reimbursement rates. These are very important. Before you jump into this, right? Understand generally what the reimbursement rates are in your area, right? One one place that you can look at are your state Medicaid rates because those are often public, not always, but often public. And TRICARE is out there. The rates are out there. They're good starting points for you, right? Obviously, if you have held roles where you are privy to reimbursement rates and you kind of have an understanding of what those reimbursements rate may be for even commercial payers, but it'll give you a good idea as to what you can expect hourly for any type of service provided, right? Then look at how much your staff are being paid in your area. And you could do this by going on Indeed or anywhere else, really, just to understand, okay, well, this is how much generally people are being paid around my area. Other companies are paying their BTs this much. And that can give you an idea as to what you may need to set your rates at, what you would need to do to be competitive, and then you can get these done like rough back of the napkin calculations that can provide valuable insights into whether your practice will be financially viable, right? Doesn't have to be this complex financial projection yet, but at least you'll have a general understanding in terms of, okay, my practice be financially viable just based on going off the reimbursement rates and what most people are paying their staff. Right? All right, so now getting into some of the fun stuff. Hopefully, I didn't scare anybody off yet in terms of just what I've said so far. But let's say now you've assessed your experience, you have an understanding of the financial landscape, you've looked at your Medicaid rates, you've looked at your TRICARE rates. You're like, all right, I think I can do this. The next thing you want to do is obviously pick your business name, right? And some of you may have already done this, but there's certain things that you need to watch out even when you pick your business name, right? So one thing is that you want to choose something that obviously reflects your values and is marketable, right? You don't want to have a very lengthy business name where it may not necessarily fit in a domain or an email address, or it's tough to put on brochures. So really make sure that you choose a business name that reflects your values and is also marketable, right? The other thing is that if you have this great business name that you got, make sure you check your state's registry to make sure it's not taken, right? Um, you can go online if you're in Florida and California. You can search for business names, And if you type in your business name there, you can see if it's already been taken, right? Once you've done that and you say, all right, the business name hasn't been taken in the state, then what you can do is you can go to USPTO to search for any federal trademarks on your name, right? The last thing you want to do, because I've seen this happen, is you don't want to be 2 years in and then find out, oh no, somebody else has a trademark on the name, and then you have to change your name. So definitely go to USPTO. You can search for federal trademarks on the name, and proceed accordingly, right? The other thing you want to do is make sure you check domain availability. You may have the best business name out there, but maybe the domain's not available, right? So maybe your business is called My ABA Services. Maybe myabaservices.com is not available. Will that impact your decision in terms of picking that business name, right? So once you've done that, you have a great business name in mind. You check the state registry, you check the USPTO for any federal trademarks. Then you want to think about your legal structure for your company, right? I know someone mentioned they have an LLC, so that's great. They've thought about it, and these are conversations you probably want to have with accountants, lawyers, to decide what the best legal structure for your business will be, right? Some people may choose LLCs, some people may choose corporations, or an S corp. It just really depends on your financial situation and what you think is best with the accountant's recommendation. So definitely have a conversation with the accountant before deciding this. And one thing that I definitely recommend if you're going to spend money on talking to either accountant or lawyer in terms of what the best legal structure for your business may be. Right. There's also an option for sole proprietorship. A lot of people tend to go that route. I don't recommend it. And the reason for that is because you assume a lot of the liability. You can get liability insurance, but as you go through this webinar, you see that, I always recommend people separate themselves from their business for liability and other reasons. So I don't really recommend going that route. If you want to choose a legal structure, you probably want to choose something that's outside of a sole proprietorship. Yeah. All right. Next thing you want to do is, so you have your legal structure, you spoke with your accountant. You're like, all right, my ABA Services LLC. That's what I'm going to move forward with. So then you have to obtain a physical address. So to move forward, you're going to need an address, street address that's not a PO box, right? And people get very confused in terms of, what type of address should they use. Should they use your home address or virtual mailbox? Or so I'm going to break it down a bit more. Um, you can use your home address. I don't recommend it. It's cost effective. I mean, if you're living there, it's free. But the cons is that it appears publicly on state filings and NPI registry. Everybody's going to know, your business associated with your home, and I'm not a big fan of that. So unless you want your home information out there in public on the NPI registry site and state filings, I would probably avoid, yeah, adding your home address as your physical address when you're um, uh, signing the credentialing forms, contracting forms, or anything else. The other option is a virtual mailbox. And a virtual mailbox is inexpensive. There's things like virtual post mail, iPostal, a variety of these different types of companies that offer virtual mailboxes. They're pretty inexpensive. They're $20 a month, maybe 10 to $20 a month. They scan in the mail for you. Usually it's fine for state registrations, but it's often not accepted for banking or credentialing. You just have to check. And it likely, especially if your state goes through any type of Medicaid site audit, it may not pass if you have a virtual mailbox where you don't have a physical location where you can go to, right? One of the things I always recommend is that if finances are a concern, and you want to be very cost effective, maybe start off with a virtual mailbox and see if that could work for you. And if not, then you can always switch to the next option, which I'm going to go over, which is a co-working space. So co-working spaces include things like the Regis, WeWork, all these other places where you can rent offices by the day or hour. And the positives of this is that it's usually acceptable for state filings. Usually you'll be able to accept it for the NPI registry and audits. And some even offer like mailbox rentals. So you can go ahead and rent mailboxes directly through there too and have them scanned and directly to your email. But the obviously the downside of that is that it's often more expensive. And sometimes you end up paying $500 per month. But some um, some Medicaid or state filings or banking, they require some type of physical office outside of a virtual mailbox. So that might be your only option. So keep that in mind as you're choosing which address to get. Right. All right. Let's see if there's any questions. The next thing you want to do, so once you have a workspace, right, you have an address, you chose your virtual mailbox, your co-working space. What you want to do is set up communications. And in this case, you can set up a virtual phone number either through Google Voice or through Ring Central, so you don't use your personal line. Again, I was saying you telling you at the beginning of the webinar is that I always like to recommend people to separate their personal life from their business. And in this case, when you're filling out information for your business, I always recommend not using a personal line. And you can obtain a virtual number from Google Voice or Ring Central. There's many options out there. And they'll also, if you go through Google Workspace for your email, they'll sign a BAA with you. It can be configured to be HIPAA compliant, and Google Voice can be added onto that pretty easily. So, and the other thing is you want to make sure you get a HIPAA compliant fax line as well. Even in this day and age, a lot of these payers are requiring you to have a fax number because that's how they're sending in referrals and other information. SR fax is a really good option. It's affordable and secure. And a lot of payers still rely on fax. So once you've set up your phone number, you have your fax, next thing you're going to have to do is get your registered agent. And registered agents are required in every state, right? And basically what they are is that they receive all the legal and tax documents on behalf of your business. A lot of times I see people, use registered agents that are very expensive because oftentimes they're bundled up with like the virtual phone numbers, the virtual addresses. Registered agents are pretty cheap. You can get them for, 30, $40 maybe a year. If you go and type in like, your state registered agent, there's a first few that come up that are like, floridaregisteredagent.com, californiaregisteredagent.com, and they're pretty inexpensive. So you can do that, and that way you can utilize them where it's needed. So definitely make sure you do your due diligence when you're choosing a registered agent. Oftentimes, if you get it separately, it's significantly cheaper than getting it all bundled together. So once you've got your registered agent, now you're ready to file your formation documents with the state. So depending on where you're at, whether you're in California and you're in Florida, wherever you may be, you can now register your business with the state. And how you do this is you go to the state website. There's usually a link to register your business. And if you have your address ready and your other information, your phone number and everything else, your registered agent, then you'll be able to file as an LLC or an LP because you've already had this discussion with your accountant in terms of the best legal entity for your business. You'll be well prepared to go ahead and file formation documents for your business. Next thing you want to do is you want to create an EIN, which is a federal tax ID number. You go online, you can do it. It's very easy. You already have your address, you have your legal entity, you have your virtual phone number. You kept your personal life private. All of your business information is specifically for your business. You can go and create an EIN tax ID very quickly. It's just a matter of minutes, and you should get a form that outlines your tax ID right after you register. Right. Once you've done that, then you have to apply for a type 2 MPI for your practice, right? And I know I've worked with some providers in the past that have not done this, and they rely on their type 1 MPI as a solo practitioner. I always advise against that. I always recommend that you set up a group MPI, even if you just plan on doing solo work. It gives you the flexibility to hire later and avoids the difficulty of converting from a solo practice to a group practice. that transition is not always easy, especially with payers. So even if you think that, okay, I'm just going to be a solo practitioner, I'm not going to hire anybody, still recommend setting up a group MPI or a type 2 MPI. And if you're BCBA, you should already have a type 1 MPI. And remember, the information that you provide for your type 2 MPI, your address, your phone number, that's all going to be public. So you want to be very careful in terms of providing the right information on the NPI registry, because again, that information is all going to be public. Yeah. So you're well prepared. You have your EIN, you have your MPI, you're all set to go. Next thing you want to do is you want to open a business bank account. So you want to make sure, obviously, your personal finances are separate from your business finances. And you want to do this before you start contracting with payers so you can set up EFT payments. As you all may know, if you understand, just medical billing, and it does take some time to get these claims paid. And if they're going to send you a check, it's going to take even longer. Checks get lost in the mail. So definitely want to make sure that whoever you're contracting credentialing with, you enroll in EFT so that those payments can be made to you electronically to your bank account, and you don't have to worry about depositing any checks. Okay. Banks may require a physical address. Like I said, they may not accept a virtual mailbox. So it just depends on the bank that you're with. But definitely want to make sure that you set up a business bank account before you start contracting and credentialing with payers. Mhm. Once you've done that, now you can go ahead and set up your website and domain. And you want to do this probably before, again, you start contracting and credentialing with payers. There's plenty of different email options out there. Google and Microsoft are obviously big ones. You can use Gmail, you can use Microsoft, and you can use them for HIPAA compliant email. One of the things I do like to mention, though, is when you're setting up your email, is that just because you've signed a BAA with Google or Microsoft doesn't mean that your business email is automatically HIPAA compliant. HIPAA is more than just signing a BAA with a vendor, right? There are extra steps you need to take to ensure that you're storing and sending PHI in a compliant manner. For example, I'll just give you one that I can create a whole webinar on this, but I'll just give you one example. If you're sending email, even through your Gmail that you've signed a BAA with, unless you have some type of third-party encryption tool, if you're sending that email to someone outside of your domain, that the contents of that are not necessarily protected, right? It's not end-to-end encryption there. So you have to make sure that whoever you're going to be working with, that you yourself, you've signed a BAA with them, right? That's the first step. But there's other items that you have to do internally to ensure that you're operating in a HIPAA compliant manner. Once you've done that, you've ensured that your email and everything is HIPAA compliant. You've signed a BAA. You kind of closed some of those holes for for exposure of PHI. The next thing is to build a professional and clean website. And I see a lot of people that begin to contract with payers before doing this. I recommend something at bare minimum first. And the reason is a lot of these contracting credentialing applications will have the website field there. And they may not necessarily check all the time, but especially in with more smaller payers or payers that are just generally more impacted or selective with their providers, they could go on your website and just check it out and understand a little bit more about you. So it's good to just build a professional, clean website. And often it's the first thing that clients and payers may look at. Yeah. All right, so now you have your website, you have your email domain. The next thing you want to do is you want to obtain some type of insurance, right, for your business. The last thing you want to do is to someone actually to sue you, and then you have to pay for it out of pocket. And the other reason is that for contract and credentialing, these insurances are required. So professional liability is required. Workers' compensation will be required if you hire somebody. So at minimum, you want to get professional liability and workers' compensation before you hire somebody. Professional liability you'll absolutely need, because any payer that you contract with, they're going to expect to see the professional liability insurance, the cover sheet, as well as the policy limits. One of the things that I recommend you get is cyber liability insurance, right? So obviously, we live in an age where phishing attacks are very common, and you want to make sure that you're protected against a lot of those things. So definitely add on cyber liability insurance. You may not necessarily do it right off the bat. You may want to do it later on when you have a few staff or few clients, but definitely something to consider. Um, the other piece that you want to consider is something called employment practices liability insurance. And what employment practice liability insurance, EPLI, is specifically covering costs with claims for discrimination, harassment, wrongful termination. Many people think that your professional liability or your liability insurance will cover some of those items, but that's not always the case. You want to make sure that, especially if you're in a more litigious state, you want to make sure you get some type of coverage for that because you may not be in the wrong at all, but anyone can bring a claim against you. So you want to make sure they're well protected in the event something happens. Okay? There's brokers like CPH and Liberty Insurance are very commonly used, just depending on the stage of your business. And we're happy to provide resources after this too, to let you know who we partner with and who we recommended in the past. All right, so you now have your insurance. You're all ready to go. You have your business name, your MPI, EIN, bank account. You're ready to start moving. Next thing you want to start doing is contracting and credentialing, right? Um, Once you start contracting credentialing, this is the area where it gets a bit tricky because yes, it's an application that you fill out, but if you fill it out incorrectly, it could have some implications down the road. So you want to make sure that you know what you're doing when you're contracting credentialing. Um, and if there's any gaps in your knowledge or you're not sure about how to contract and credential, then I do recommend working with somebody to help you with that, right? We've seen a lot of errors when it comes down to, okay, I've contracted, credentialed with a payer, but maybe I didn't contract or credential correctly, and now my claims are getting denied. And now I have to go back and fix all of the contracting and credentialing errors that were made. So it can, and also if you don't do it right the first time, it can cause big delays. So let's say you submit something to a payer, your contract and credential application, and 60 days later they say, well, you were missing this, and then it may take some more time for them to get back to you once you resubmit the corrected materials. So it is something that you want to look into. We have preferred companies that we work with. We're happy to recommend. Um, but definitely think about it as you're going down the contracting credentialing process is to see, all right, am I comfortable with doing this on my own? Or is this something that maybe better outsourced to someone who's done this in the past and understands the process, right? Contract and credentialing can take quite some time, right? It's not something that if you do today, you'll be ready to accept clients tomorrow. It takes, can take up to 3 months, and depending on the backlog they have, and also depending on the capacity of their network. Some payers may not necessarily even be open for providers, and they may be closed. So you have to be prepared for that as well, right? As competition increases and as more people are starting the practices, more payers will start to close their networks. Okay? All right. Once you're done with that, you've submitted your contracting credentialing applications. Now, what you can do is what I recommend is getting this to work on your HR systems and policies. And this includes your HIPAA compliance policies, your HR and payroll setup, right? Your client services agreements, your internal agency policies. Nice thing is that if you work with Theralytics, right, we offer a startup package. So you don't have to pay anything for 6 months or until you start your first client. So while you're getting through contract and credentialing, you can also have access to some free consultation and practice management software to kind of help start building the foundation of your practice. Mm. All right. I'm going to stop there really quickly, and just answer a few questions. Mandy asks, "What free fax service that is HIPAA compliant do you know of?" None are free. but there is one that is HIPAA compliant, where it's relatively low in cost that I recommend. It's called SR Fax. They'll sign a BAA with you. And again, remember what I said, just because you sign a BAA with a vendor does not automatically mean that what you're doing is HIPAA compliant. You have to make sure that there are other items that you take care of to ensure that your full process is HIPAA compliant, right? So BAA is the first step, but SR Fax will sign a BAA with you. Okay? What companies do you recommend for contract credentialing? We have a few preferred partners that we work with, and we're happy to send those partners over to you if you like. Um, when you're dealing with a credentialing company, what should you typically expect in terms of communication and turnaround time? Yeah, this is a really, really good question. So typically, there's stuff that is within the credentialing company's control, and then there's things that are not within their control, right? So in terms of gathering the right information, that credentialing company should be your subject matter expert. They should tell you exactly what they need, right? Hey, I need your I'm giving TRICARE as an example. We need your CPR card. I need your certificate. I need your insurance policy. I need this application filled out. They should be the subject matter expert, and they should have, uh, a very good communication turnaround in terms of getting the items that they need, right? In 24 to 48 hours in terms of email responses, just in terms of getting the items that they need so they can submit your application, right? Because that's why you're hiring them. They're subject matter expert, right? You're not, they're filling in the gaps, right, for your credentialing. With that said, when they submit that application, now it's outside of their hands to some degree, right? Where their responsibility comes in is how often do they do the follow-ups, right? Are they following up on a weekly basis? If the payer said, "Hey, it takes a minimum of 30 days," are they following up on that, 25th day just to get a status and the 31st day to get a status? That's where you have to look at and say, all right, well, how fast is my credentialing company working with the payer to then update me, right? But when they're in that stage of just submitting the application, there is a waiting period. There's not much they can do. They can't really push the application too much if there's a 30-day standard credentialing period. But in terms of communicating that information to you, absolutely, they should be doing that very quickly. All right, now let's some more questions later on. So just going into typical startup costs and margins, I just want to recap some of the things that I was talking about and what the cost may look like and kind of quantify some of this information. The first step is your business formation and legal kind of costs, right? You're going to have costs establishing your state LLC. You're going to have costs associated with your corporation filing fees, registered agent, and you're going to see this big variance, right? Like $100 to $1,000. It just depends on how hands off you want to be, right? If you want to be completely hands off, you can pay someone to do everything for you, right? If you want to be very hands on, file yourself, get your registered agent yourself, then it's going to be significantly cheaper. So that's why you'll see kind of this big range for some of these kind of costs that I have here. Next one is the address office, right? Obviously, if you're working from your home, it's free, right? But if you're getting a virtual mailbox or something, it's going to be a little bit more. You have your communications, your phone number can be $20 to $50. Website and domain, you may be able to go and maybe you're very tech savvy, and you can go to some type of AI tool and design your own website and host it for very cheap. Or you want to hire a professional web designer to do your website. So there's a big range there. Um, and email IT, obviously, the most part that's going to range around $6 to $12 per user per month. And some of the other big ones that I want to highlight are going to be your insurance, depending on how much insurance you want right off the bat. So you definitely need professional liability insurance, but some of the other policies can often wait until you hire employees or until you have clients. We have payroll software that you'll have to also purchase and set up before you start hiring clients so that you can go ahead and pay them and they can view their pay stubs. All those things could add up just depending on the type of payroll software you get. You can use something that's cost effective like Gusto, which you obviously have to do a little bit more hands-on work, or something like ADP, where they can actually essentially hands off payroll for you and take care of all the HR piece, but that's obviously going to be more expensive, right? And then there's licensing and marketing. So anywhere from 2,000 to 15,000 upfront. Again, that range is dependent on how hands-on you want to be with your business, and about 200 to 1,500 month ongoing. These aren't exact numbers or anything, but just general numbers. That we've researched and come up with when you're starting your business, right? But then there's other fees too. For example, some state Medicaids, they'll require an enrollment fee, right? I know one state, I forget which one it was, they required about $750 to enroll in their state Medicaid program, right? And so those aren't always things that we can list here and itemize, just be dependent on your local market, right? The other thing we recommend you get in early on is a practice management software, right? For example, like Theralytics, we offer a startup package. You don't have to pay anything for the first 6 months or until you onboard your first client. So it allows you to avoid those practice management costs. Typically, there's minimums involved with all these practice management softwares. And then also the nice thing that we do is that Theralytics will provide that free month of billing services, right? So you may not understand how to bill for services, how to follow up. We'll provide one free month of billing services so that you can decide if you want to be very hands-on with billing or hands-off, right? If you don't choose Theralytics, then you'll have to factor some of these costs in, which can get pretty pricey, right? The other costs that are probably you're going to be your biggest expense moving forward is going to be your payroll costs, right? And here's the ongoing dilemma in this industry is that you need to pay staff every 2 weeks, but you may not get reimbursed for 30 days, right? That gap is going to create cash flow challenges, right? And uh, sometimes not even 30 days, it could be 45, 60 days, right? It's just depending on the specific payer. But the nice thing is that if you're, like I was saying, if you're a BCBA owner, you have an advantage. You could do some of the BCBA work yourself. It's going to reduce labor costs. But regardless, you're going to need some capital to cover the gap, right? And how much capital you need is going to depend on your startup costs, how quickly your payers reimburse, and the number of staff you hire, right? So it's really important to have a plan in place because I've seen a lot of people get really in messy situations if they don't have a good strong financial plan in place. As you grow, I always recommend setting aside of a portion of your earnings to build the cash reserves. So you're doing the BCBA work, but on the BT side, you're saving some of that money for cash reserves in the event that a payer doesn't pay. I'll give you a very great example. TRICARE is currently having some payment issues because of everything that's going on with the shutdown, and people are worried that they're not going to get paid for the work that they're doing. And so some of the practices that don't have those cash reserves set aside are going to be left kind of scrambling when it comes time for payroll. So if a payer delays a payment or issue arises, cash reserves always help. You're not caught off guard. Um, One of the things that you want to think about as you're building it is, clinic space versus home based. As you start off, and clinic space obviously provides immediate benefits. You have stronger branding, more marketability. It's easier way to build a culture within your team, but it comes at a cost. So you can always start at home and then transition to a clinic space once you have the resources, right? Um, the other thing that you'll need to think about is marketing, website, and branding costs. So if you're in a competitive area, right, if where there's a lot of providers, it's going to be difficult to find clients. And marketing will become a necessity, right? Some low impact, sort of high impact but low cost strategies are visiting pediatrician offices, offering free community presentations, connecting with providers who have wait lists, right? It's finding those differentiators that you can create versus some of these large PE-backed organizations, right? Um, One of the items I like to touch base on, jump in is how much should your net margins be? What is a healthy net margin, right? And everybody's gonna have their different opinions on this, and it's not necessarily science-based or anything, but a healthy net margin typically is around 10 to 15%. Very healthy margins are gonna be around 15%. So at the end of the day, if your profit margins are at 15%, and this is after payroll, expenses, paying yourself, and everything else, you're doing quite well. And this is gonna vary based on your model, your payer mix, your reimbursement rates, how much you're paying yourself. I'm more so from a perspective of a traditional model where you're hiring RBTs, right? So important to really keep these numbers in mind as you evaluate additional expenses, right? You want to usually keep around the 10 to 15% range. If you're doing higher than 15% in your net margins, and you're doing a pretty good job, right? Um, as you continue with your business journey, one of the things that you're going to find thrown in your face all the time are these management service organizations. I like to touch on them because they're becoming more popular recently. Um, and there's a surge of companies offering these all-in-one platforms, or they're called managed service organizations. And these companies advertise that they can handle everything from you. They'll set your business up, they'll do your credentialing, they'll do your billing, whatever it is. Before I even jump into that, my first piece of advice is this. There's a lot of vendors jumping into the industry, tons. There's a lot of softwares, there's a lot of management service companies, billers, credentialing specialists, tons. If you go on Facebook groups, you're going to see a lot of people trying to market their service. Please, even us, research every single company you consider working with. Look into their owners, executives, their mission, and really understand who you're going to be working with, right? Especially if a company is going to have such a big control in your organization. You want to make sure you know who they are, right? And oftentimes people will um, uh, say that setting up your business, your EIN, MPI state registration, it's very intimidating. Let us handle it for a fee. These concepts are things that you can probably easily learn yourself if you take the time. Especially with all the LLMs out there, you'll save money and you'll gain valuable experience that are going to help you then start another business down the road if you decide to do that, right? So these things aren't necessarily that intimidating once you break them down. Some of them may take some time, and it may take a while to complete some of the items I mentioned, but it's not as intimidating as it sounds, right? And the other thing is what I've seen people get trapped in by is um, these companies will offer to take a percentage of your gross revenue in exchange for, they'll provide you with, obviously the scheduling, billing, the back office piece, right? And some of them will charge 20 to 30% of your gross revenue. I always like to break that down in terms of what it looks like in numbers. So, for example, if you collect $100,000 in revenue, your MSO will take about 30%. That's 30,000 dollars gone right away. Right. You're left with 70,000 to cover all staff and operating expenses. And even break this down further. For example, if your RBT reimbursement rate is 50 an hour, 10 to 15 of that will go to the MSO immediately, right? So they're getting a piece of that even before you can pay expenses. So this is very different than traditional ownership, partnership, or ownership structure, right? If I invest in your business, or someone invests in your business, right? They won't get the gross revenue. They're going to get whatever's net. So you have to really think about that when you're looking at some of these companies. Maybe it makes sense to work with an MSO if your reimbursement rates are great and you only want to focus on the clinical work. But please do the math and understand the financial implications and other implications before signing anything. Okay. Um, Word of caution, I've seen certain companies, especially on Facebook, making promises that, hey, you'll make 150 grand to $200,000 per year. I'm not going to name any names. But some of these companies have rebranded multiple times, and with ethical issues. Be wary. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is, right? Be wary. Do your research. Just like I said, on any vendor that you work with, do your research on the owners, executives, mission, why they're doing what they do, before jumping in, right? I've seen a lot more vendors trying to jump into this space, and some are great. Some are a lot of great vendors out there, but you definitely want to do your research, right? All right. Last thing I want to touch on is consultants. Consultants can be a very valuable resource, especially if you're new to running a business. We work with a lot of great consultants. We're happy to share a list of our consultants as well. But again, do your homework, right? Just because a consultant has a Harvard MBA and ran other businesses, they may not understand the unique challenges of the ABA industry. Also, someone who's exited an ABA company may not understand your specific goals or model, right? So always check a consultant's background ensure their expertise aligns with your needs, and confirm the landscape that you're operating in. Yeah. All right. Um, we already talked about that. So, guys, here is my email. There's a phone number too, but I'm accessible via email. Feel free to note it down. Email me with any questions that you may have. I'm very passionate about this stuff. I've started a business in the past, and I want to make sure that people, don't get taken advantage of. And this is kind of why I do these things, so that I can provide a very real, down to earth perspective. So feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm very transparent. And hopefully everybody found this webinar very informational. So take some. All right. Um, open up to questions, Julia. Right? You good?
Yes.
All
Sorry, I
right.
wasn't able to see them when we
No
were,
worries.
but
It's
there's
all
a
good.
few.
Sure. Um, Have you heard of Tilly 3Y Health? Yeah, like I said, I'm not going to name any names for these ads that I get on Facebook for people, companies promising 150 to $200,000. Um, but do your research on any company that's out there, right? Whether it's 3Y Health or Tilly, understand their owners, who runs them, um, their mission. Do your due diligence before handing over 30% of your business to somebody.
I think that's everything for questions, but if anything else comes up, I'm gonna send over this webinar in a or in a recap email along with the list of credentialing as well. And then anything else that we might think of if Zoe gets a ton of questions and he finds that it's the same one, I'll include that as well. And if you guys ever need a resource, we're always here.
Right. Oh, looks like we have one more. Julia. Who
Oh,
do you
perfect.
recommend using for employee compensation insurance? Okay, so for workers' compensation insurance, you can usually look at your state workers' compensation insurance first. Usually, it's actually quite affordable if you go that route. But you can always go to a broker too, and they may recommend that as well, right? I recommend CPH Associates for just general liability insurance, but Liberty Insurance, and we have a contact there, and we're happy to provide that contact to you. Liberty Insurance does great work with ABA providers, and they try to find you the most cost-effective option for your business. And so that is one way you could search. So going to a broker is usually the best bet because they'll provide you with a wide variety of options, and one of those options may be your state plan. So, how do I know when I should be using a PEO? Yeah, that's a good question. And when I had those margins or sort of those ranges for payroll costs, it was like $100 to $2,000 a month. PEO is on the high end of the range. So PEO is if you want to be completely hands off, like I don't want to hire any HR staff, or I don't want to necessarily worry about the HR piece of it. I don't want to worry about the payroll piece of it either. I want someone to do the payroll for me. It's great if you want to be hands off and you have the finances to make that decision. Um, you know, Early on, I always recommend people kind of understand this, maybe work with a consultant on some of these items, and then transition over to PEO if it makes sense. But if the PEO is cost effective and it's something where you're like, I want to wash my hands with it, I don't necessarily want to deal with it, it's definitely a good option for you. Yeah.
Perfect. That is about everything.
Right.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for joining today. I hope everyone has a
Thank you
great week.
guys.